What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy FPL and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'm going to take you guys through the best value for money players in FPL at the current moment. Through this video, I'm going to be taking you guys through a couple of graphs and visualizations that I managed to come up with that will show you how valuable players actually are, comparing their price to their points. Just a quick little update. Unfortunately, I have tested positive, so I'm not going to be featuring my face too much during this video, as I'm sure you guys don't want a sick Dayvy FPL. And I also do apologize if the voice is sounding not that smooth. And obviously, I just wanted to create this video tonight before I do deteriorate over the upcoming days. And this way, you guys actually have 3 great videos, in my opinion, on the channel for you guys to go ahead with those drafts over the next upcoming days. The first video obviously was the initial draft, which I released on Monday evening. The second video was the fixture ticker, and I showed you guys how you can create your own fixture ticker or use one from a website or FPL tool such as Fantasy Football Fix. And then obviously this video is going to show you guys how to kind of calculate how valuable FPL assets actually are, and maybe do a little bit of a prediction of how valuable they're going to be in the upcoming 2021/2022 FPL season. But as I said, this video is going to cover all the best value players or bang for your buck options that you guys can get. So if that's something you guys are interested in, sit back, relax, and let's go straight into it. So going over a quick reminder of my partner for the upcoming FPL season, and that's going to be Fantasy Football Fix. Fantasy Football Fix is a great FPL tool website and app that hopefully will make you better FPL managers while using their tools. I've managed to get a massive 65% discount for viewers of this channel. So if you guys do use my affiliate link, full transparency there, I do get a small cut of the money if you guys do choose to go onto the premium subscriptions. And that's just a little bit of a way to support me while also getting some great FPL tools in your locker. But that's enough for the update. Don't really want to force this down your guys' throat. So let's get to the first talking point. So as I mentioned in this video, it's all about the value for money players, or as I like to call it, price versus points. So in this video, throughout the graphs and the visualizations that you'll see, I have compared the price of the current season, so the season we're going into. So for example, a Mo Salah, a Fernandes, they're going to be the price that they currently are versus the total points they scored in last season. So yes, I know this is kind of maybe a little bit of a weird thing to compare the last season's points with this season's price, but what I wanted to do is give you guys an indication of which players are undervalued or overpriced by FPL. And that's probably what the video is going to be titled, something about the mistakes that FPL made. And you guys are going to see the exact goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and forwards that have been underpriced or overpriced. Also, something nice to kind of take into account is the prediction for the upcoming season. So let's say Mo Salah has the exact same points tally at the end of this season as he did last season. That's going to give you guys a nice indication of value for money, taking last season's point total. And you can also get an indication of maybe players are going to be performing better than they did last season. And that's going to even boost up their value for money that you guys can get. So I just want to give you guys a little bit of context behind this video, and I'll be covering what the plots actually are in the next talking point. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this talking point. As I said, we're going to be doing some plots and visualizations, and what I did was I graphed this data on Python, and the plots that I managed to come up with were, firstly, I did price versus points, and then secondly, taking on kind of the gradient of that graph, it's going to be price divided by points, or value for money as I like to call it. So we kind of have a plot on the left hand side and then on the right hand side. Left hand side is a little bit cluttered because I've kind of highlighted a lot of players, but on the right hand side it's kind of a nice indication of the comparison in that specific goalkeeper, defender, midfield and forward of the valuation that you're actually getting for certain players. There was a little bit of a criteria that I managed to use when I did kind of calculate the suitable players, and that's going to be that the player had to score more than 75 points in the 2020/2021 season. And the way I got this kind of 75 or more points is that I took the total fixtures in a season, which is going to be 38, and then theoretically every single player should be getting 2 appearance points. So what I wanted to kind of show you is I wanted to get, on one hand, the players that are absolutely nailed, they're going to be safe picks to go for, and then secondly, maybe a player came in on the second half of the season and they would have got a couple goals, a couple FPL returns, and that would have taken them over that 75 points mark. So the 75 points mark is quite a low expectation, and I think maybe for a 4.5 I would expect 76 points, but for any more expensive player I would definitely want more points. points than that. So this kind of gave us a nice little criteria to eliminate options that we might not be looking at. And then secondly, I did put a linear regression line, and that kind of links to the selective labeling that I also incorporated. So what I mean by linear regression line is I took in every position those 75 plus points, and I kind of fitted a linear regression line. And why I did this is that I wanted to compare the players to each other, and the linear regression line gives us a nice little average, but I did do that for every single player over the 75 points mark. But what you'll see on the graphs is that I didn't highlight every single dot or every single player because I used selected labeling. I only highlighted the players that are either good value for money, or secondly, players that we actually are looking for. I didn't kind of want to make the graphs too jumbled. I wanted to go for actual players that we're targeting so that we can give a fair comparison and not kind of be swayed by these cheaper options that don't end up returning many points. So that's why you'll see on the linear regression lines, they look quite skewed to the bottom, and that's just because there's a lot of players that are quite cheap and don't return a lot of points versus the players that we're actually going to be looking for. But I explained this throughout the plot, so don't get too bogged down on it. I just wanted to kind of give you guys a little bit of context and background before we get into the plots. So I'm going to be disappearing for the next couple talking points as we go over goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and forwards, and then finally giving you guys kind of a value per minute plot selection. So starting off with the goalkeepers, as you can see nicely now, we can see the two graphs that I managed to come up with. On the left hand side, we have points in the 2020/2021 season versus the price that they currently are for the upcoming season. And as we can see there with the linear regression line, it's kind of fitted quite well with the goalkeepers. Fortunately, there's not a lot of goalkeepers, so I could kind of highlight a lot of them, whereas with the defenders, midfielders, forwards, I kind of had to do a little bit of a criteria there and do selective labeling. But basically how you read these graphs is on the left hand side, on the x-axis you have the price, and then obviously that increases, and that's why I told you guys that the right hand graph is basically the gradient of this left hand graph, because you're doing the y over x, and that gives you the value or points per million that these players are offering. And as you can see there, you can kind of get a good indication of how valuable the player is on the left hand side by taking the player's position and bringing it back to the line of regression. And that distance between those 2 points, the higher it is, the more valuable the player is actually going to be. And this was one of the things that I kind of picked up when I plotted this graph, was how valuable Martinez is. I haven't really seen Martinez in any single FPL drafts that I've kind of been monitoring over on YouTube and Twitter, and this kind of shows you if Martinez can replicate last season, he's going to be an absolute steal still at 5.5 million. And that's why I think he's actually might be a little bit underrated. Now this obviously is something that we have to take into account if he can actually replicate last season. The one thing about Martinez that I'll always say last season is that he was outperforming the kind of XGA that Aston Villa were producing. But that just shows how quality of a keeper he is, and that shows how many save points he was actually getting. So that's the nice thing about Martinez, and the reason he got so many points last season was that he was racking up those save points and racking up those bonus points. There are a couple of other players here that I can also highlight. Meslier from Leeds providing really good value there. The one thing I also want to note is that just take a note of the value increments here. 34 points is basically what Martinez was providing, and when you look at the defenders, midfielders and forwards, you'll see that there actually isn't even a player that manages to touch that even at your most seller price ranges. So Martinez's value was absolutely sensational, and if he does, as I said, manage to replicate, that should be quite good. The other thing I also wanted to note is that you're probably looking at that red dot and wondering what that is. But what I did was, because Sanchez from Brighton is such a popular option, and because I'm looking at him personally, what I did was, because Sanchez only played a couple of games last season, he actually missed 11 games for Brighton in total. I took the games that he did play, I got kind of a clean sheet average for those. So let's say he played 10 games, kept 2 clean sheets, I got a rate from that, and then I converted that for those 11 games that he didn't play, and I implemented those clean sheet points. And what you can see there is kind of the prediction I got from last season of how Sanchez would actually fare. And as you can see, great value for money there. I kind of just tipping Meslier, who comes in just a little bit more expensive this season. So Sanchez for me, if you can keep that rate of clean sheets that Brighton had last season, which as I said is an expectation, and he might not actually do that, but if he does, Sanchez looks absolute FPL gold if we kind of want to go for him. Just pause the video right now if you maybe want to look at a Guaita and Edison, other players that you are considering, as I'm not going to be talking about every single player, as I don't want to make this video like 2 hours long, and I want to just get the most important points and the players that I currently am looking at. So now going on to the defenders, and this is probably going to be the first talking point that I say about FPL's price ratings. And the players that I'm going to be targeting here are going to be Trent Alexander-Arnold and Robertson. So on the left hand side there, you can see there's a massive distinction in price between the two players on the right and the kind of blob of players on the left. And that's going to be Robertson and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who come in at 7 million and 7.5 respectively. And as you can see with the linear regression line, they are undervaluing their kind of price. And I think this is kind of the reason why FPL priced Trent Alexander-Arnold at 7.5 yet again, even though he returned 50 less points than 2 seasons ago, is because there's an expectation that when Van Dijk comes back, they're going to wrap up that defense and they're going to keep a lot more clean sheets. I think Alexander-Arnold's last season was kind of a combination of bad form on his own part and then also obviously that kind of rotation of centre backs for Liverpool. And I kind of agree with FPL here, but I still think that he should have been dropped in price. For me, I don't understand how you can return 50 less points but still keep the same price. But that just kind of shows you what FPL's mindset is and how they think Trent will do in next season. So I think maybe 7 million would have been a better price point for Trent, and then maybe Robertson around the similar price, because as you can see, both of them actually return similar kind of points totals. The rest of the team is actually quite interesting, and I'm going to refer to the right-hand side graph here because you can see Trent and Robertson in the middle of the pack there kind of in terms of value. And at the top of the bunch, we've got Cresswell from West Ham, Target from Aston Villa, and then Wan-Bissaka from Manchester United. So Wan-Bissaka is the interesting one for me because he is actually outperforming Shaw here. But the thing you have to remember about Luke Shaw is that Wan-Bissaka basically played every single minute, whereas Luke Shaw did get rotated or had a couple of injuries last season. And there's about 20 points between them, so not a lot in the grand scheme of things. So I still am favouring Luke Shaw, but I think Wan-Bissaka, if he does keep up this form, could be one of those maybe outside punts where Luke Shaw has a super high ownership, maybe Wan-Bissaka is a little bit more differential. But for me, I'm going to be going for Luke Shaw because of that attacking threat. Wan-Bissaka simply just hasn't kind of locked up that attacking department at that fullback position, whereas Luke Shaw seems to have really progressed over these last couple months. The points I also want to highlight here are a couple of 4.5 options. We have a Connor Cody, we have a Holding, and we have some other options there coming in that are quite cheap. So you guys can definitely look at those assets if you want to go for some more cheaper options. The one I probably will highlight, and I'll highlight him later on, is actually going to be Holding. So at 4.5 million, Rob Holding actually didn't play a lot of minutes for Arsenal kind of last season. He only came into the squad for basically the last half, and that just kind of shows how good that Arsenal defense was. So if Holding manages to kind of secure that slot, maybe Ben White doesn't come into that Arsenal lineup or get the transfer, then maybe Holding could be a nice option at 4.5. And then we have a couple of other options there like an Ayling from Leeds, who provides some good middle of the pack kind of value. And then we kind of get into the bottom half of things. And just remember that this is the players that I have selectively looked at because I don't think we're going to be looking at every single defender in the game. A couple of options also here, such as a Diaz and a Stones, from Man City's point of view, had the best defense arguably in the Premier League last season. So they could be options that you guys do look at. And please remember, this is based on the prices they are currently, so not the prices they were based on last season. Another option probably to look at there is going to be Dunk from Brighton. Another option that comes in a little bit more expensive than someone like a Lamptey or Sanchez, but because he is so nailed, I still think he could provide some good value. And on those attacking set pieces, I think that he could also provide a couple of goals and maybe some assists in terms of those players. There's kind of a lot of other options here like a Luca Digne, a Maguire, and Azpilicueta. These options simply haven't kind of lived up to their price bracket, and I do think this season they're going to have to kind of pull up their socks to make it worth buying them in your FPL teams. Now going on to the midfield where there's a lot of players there, so excuse the left-hand graph. Kind of just pause the video, zero in on the players that you are looking at, and then that might give you a little bit of a clearer image. But because there's so many players in that kind of blob from 4 to 8 million, I couldn't kind of differentiate the players that well in terms of the labeling. But I still think it is clear if you're kind of looking for a player like a Saka, nicely in the middle there, Rafinha, those kind of players pop out. And then we do have our more expensive options coming in on that top right bracket. So the first thing I want to note on the left-hand graph is kind of the overvalue that Mane, Sterling, and De Bruyne offer. So De Bruyne I can kind of understand maybe a little bit because he has had some historical massive FPL seasons where he's got a lot of points, but I do think considering last season it hasn't been the best season for De Bruyne. Now this could come down to maybe him not playing that much, injuries, that sort of thing, but I am still expecting De Bruyne to have a good season, and the same with Sterling. So you can maybe say that they're worth that price point, but I think that maybe slightly cheaper would have made them more interesting. But the one player definitely is Sadio Mane. Got more points than De Bruyne, but I think compared to Salah, you're simply not going to go for Sadio Mane because in my opinion, he's overvalued by quite a high margin. Other options, they're coming in quite cheap. The one thing I also wanted to note is that what I did with Dallas is because Dallas racked up so many clean sheets and now he's classified as a midfielder, what I did was I took away every single clean sheet point, or for example 3 points, because a defender gets 4 points whereas a midfielder only gets 1. So I took those 3 points, so every single clean sheet point extra, I took them away to give us a fair representation. If Dallas has the exact same same kind of attacking outlet in terms of goals and assists, he still provides massive value at 5.5. You can see the Leeds attackers provide great value, leading the margin there with Harrison and Dallas. And Harrison for me is the interesting one because a lot of people are looking at Rafinha, but in terms of price per million, Harrison absolutely takes the cake here, and he's definitely on my radar. I don't know if I'll bring the Leeds assets in just yet. I might wait for their fixtures to become a little bit better, but Dallas and Rafinha definitely looks like a double up that you guys can go for. That's going to return quite a lot of value for your FPL teams. Other players like Souček obviously having a great season. It's going to be a wait and see to see maybe how he performs this season. Also wanted to highlight Son here. So out of those more premium attackers, even though Son is rated more expensive at 10 million, he still provides the best option in terms of value out of that front department, all those more premium assets. Fernandes, Salah, you can kind of pick those two assets out, more middle of the pack kind of options. But the thing that midfielders offer is that captaincy. So that's why you'll see that there's more modest kind of value returns for midfielders because you're more likely to captain a midfielder than a defender. So they usually price them quite fairly because obviously with those captaincy returns, you're almost doubling the value that they do present. And that's why Salah, Fernandes, I would still recommend those players, even though their value for million doesn't look that great. Other options that you guys can look at, there's some interesting ones here like a Bowen. I know from a differential point of view, those West Ham assets are looking quite good. A Trossard, same with the Brighton assets. Those fixtures look great from a Brighton point of view. And then we also have Gundogan. But with Gundogan, it's a little bit interesting because I don't think he's going to have the exact kind of replica of last season, because last season he simply was just an absolute monster in terms of FPL, in terms of the Premier League, and he had a great season, whereas this season, I don't know if he's going to exactly replicate it. Also to note on that right-hand side and the left-hand side, I've got two Traores. So the less valuable Traore is going to be the one from Wolves, and the more expensive one is going to be Bertrand Traore from Aston Villa. And right now in my own FPL draft, I've included Bertrand Traore because in terms of value for million, he actually provides a nice little entry into that Aston Villa attack. So what I would do, just pause the video if you kind of want to single out a specific player and then kind of look at them and see if you think they're overpriced or underpriced, or maybe you think FPL's got it bang on the money and they're perfectly priced at that selected price point. So going on to the last kind of a regional pick of defenders, goalkeepers, midfielders and forwards, we're going to be going over the forwards. And the forward department this year looks absolutely stacked, and I'm kind of, my mouth's watering at the options that we do have. A couple of 7.5 options, most kind of strikers are priced around that point. They look like great value for money. You can see the interesting one here is actually going to be Bamford. So Bamford is the best value for money forward in the game based on last season. And I think, as I said with most people's drafts, I haven't really seen Bamford, but maybe that's just because of the fixtures. But I think that Bamford has it in his locker to perfectly replicate last season, and I think that he was one of those assets that was actually underappreciated. Great value for money here if you manage to replicate it. And the second option is going to be Ollie Watkins. So the interesting thing about Ollie Watkins is just imagine if he could finish and wasn't offside all the time. Imagine the value for money that you could have got there, and that's just kind of playing in the back of my mind. If Grealish manages to stay at Aston Villa, I think that Ollie Watkins could be one of the strikers to own for the entire season, just because I think from an attacking point of view, Aston Villa create loads of chances, and hopefully this time Ollie Watkins can finish them. The next couple notable options are Calvert-Lewin, who comes in at third for best value. Kane kind of slots in there around Chris Wood and Adams. It's going to be kind of yet to see if Kane has the exact same season that he had, but the interesting thing to see is that I think Kane had a record-breaking season, if I do recall. I think this is basically just because of how many assists he actually did get, but because his price point is quite expensive, that's completely dropped his value for money, and I don't really know if he's going to replicate it, so I'm kind of leaning towards maybe not going for him. The other options to kind of look at kind of combine with each other, I'm not really looking at too many there. Cavani is an interesting one because obviously he didn't play the entire season, but we will look at him later on in the next talking point when we talk about per minute value and value per 90 minutes. So as you can see on the left hand side, the linear regression line is pretty standard, and that's because most of the forwards I managed to actually cover in this, and I didn't do too many selective labeling here because I actually managed to plot most of the players that I wanted to. So now going on to the per 90 minute value or points total. And why I wanted to do this is that it can be argued actually when looking at these other positions that have really focused on kind of the players that played more minutes. And what I'm saying about that is theoretically, if a player plays every single minute of every single game, he's more likely to get points. And that might be unfair to players that have come in, or maybe players that come off the bench but provide good value. And why I wanted to cover this is that one, we either have those options that, as I said, started on the bench, but maybe this season they actually play the majority of minutes, minutes, or secondly, players that were transferred in later but still have good value for money. And that's what I was talking about maybe with a Cavani. You can see on the right hand side there, in terms of points per 90 minutes, actually falls in the middle of the bracket here. And what I did with this kind of selection is I did use subjective selections here. I took kind of a threshold. I only selected the players more expensive than that because I simply didn't want to kind of focus on every single option in FPL. So you can see on the bottom axis there what kind of those thresholds are. Starting off on the left hand side, that's value per 90 minutes. So that's exactly the same as the right hand side graph of the previous talking points. So that's going to be points divided by price, and then I divided it by the minutes played by every single player. And on the left hand side, the best value per 90 minutes played is actually going to be John Stones. El Ghazi comes in at second place, but the thing I kind of want to focus on with both of these kind of graphs is how valuable the Man City assets are. And that's kind of the caveat with Man City assets, is they great value for money. It's just whether they're going to play or not. I mean, look at Foden on the right hand graph there. He's got basically 7.5 points per 90 minutes achieved. Imagine if he played every single minute of the Premier League. He would be the highest scorer by no margin there, even better than Bruno Fernandes and Mo Salah. So unfortunately with that Man City rotation, I can't see it getting any better, and I just kind of hope that maybe Foden manages to get into more starting 11s, because that's going to equal more FPL points for his owners. El Ghazi is a nice little surprise here. I just have to kind of worry about his playing time, but he can kind of rival your Grealishes, your Bertrand Traorés if he manages to start, and we're just going to kind of have to see if he does make it into that starting 11. Joe Willock coming in there, the kind of hero of the end of last season, playing for Newcastle, is still an Arsenal player though, so it's going to be interesting to see maybe if he can replicate that form for Arsenal. And then we also have Moreno or Rodrigo, who comes from Leeds. So he's the other striker for kind of Bamford, who was subbed a little bit later on towards the end of last season, and his points or value per million is actually looking quite good. So if he manages to get into that starting 11 over maybe a Bamford, he could be a nice little cheap entry into that lineup. Lingard, another player like a Willock who had a great end to last season, but going back to Man United, don't know how much playing time he's going to get. And then we kind of filter down here, featuring some actually goalkeepers. So this shows you how valuable those goalkeepers actually going to be, because they do score a lot of points for the price brackets that they do come into. Another notable one is going to be Jota there. If he manages to start for Liverpool, could be great value for money. Ferran Torres, another Man City option that's quite good value for money. On the right hand side, we have some other options here, such as a Bruno Fernandes, a Mo Salah, just showing why those players are good captaincy options, because they return good points per 90 minutes. And that's what the right hand graph kind of allows you to do. The left hand graph kind of allows you to see the value, but the right hand graph you can almost base your captaincy options on, because if a Bruno Fernandes or Mo Salah are returning such high points per 90 minutes played, those are definitely some of the best options that you can go for from a captaincy point of view. Jota making an appearance here, actually better than Mo Salah when he features on the field, so that could be something that you guys take into account. And I'm just kind of hoping that he manages to feature. Kevin De Bruyne yet again showing that when he does actually play, he returns the points, and if he manages to start every single game, I'm pretty sure with how good Man City are going forward, he could return a ton of points. But as I said, with all of these kind of talking points, these plots, just pause the video right now if you guys want to kind of get a little bit of a deep analysis, and I will probably post this on my Twitter page a little bit later on, maybe in a week or so. I want the main focus to be on the videos, and then the Twitter page can come second. But this is basically a wrap for the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. Please don't forget to like it if you did, and subscribe if you're new and have not subscribed yet. I would appreciate some feedback on how you guys are enjoying the videos, as well as drop down in the comments below if you want any videos for me to create over the next couple of days. But I'm going to be signing off. It's been Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.